everybody, it's Anna. I really need to apologize to all of you for my lack of videos. The past 4 weeks have been really hectic, because I just started my junior year of high school, and I got cast in my fall show, which is 5 one-act shows, and I got cast in a lead in 3 of them. So, I've been, all over the place. But, I don't have anything to do right now. So, yeah. This is the smut chapter, the long awaited smut chapter. Again, I'm sorry for that, but yay! We're getting there. In the song at the end, it's I've Got You Under My Skin by Frank Sinatra, but considering that my voice when I'm singing, my lower register can't go down as far as it does in that song, I picked the Michael Bublé cover and put it with the sound of a running shower, which is an actual running shower. I use my mom's bathroom. And if you can't hear the music, I apologize, and let me know so that way I can go back and re-record it and then put it back up again later. And also, you can hear the music, the background music to the song, even though it's supposed to be a cappella, like Blaine singing in the shower. But I couldn't do that. I'm not capable of that ability. Kind of sad. But still, I hope that you guys enjoy this. This is not the only chapter I will be posting today. I'm going to try to post about 3. Because you guys have waited for about 3 or 4 weeks now, and I feel so awful about that. So I'm going to post up until chapter 12 maybe today, and then I'm going to make sure that I get the rest of them done quicker than I did, because the homework in 2 AP classes and all the rest honors is just ridiculous. And I've been trying to work really hard on that, but I swear I will keep up with this and all my other projects as well. Yeah. So, please don't give up on me yet. This, hopefully, Syrup and Honey, the audiobook, will be done by the end of the year, if not a little bit over that. Also, give me some ideas you want me to do for the next book, because once I'm done with this one, I'm gonna keep trying to do more. So give me any requests, anything like that. Hopefully we can keep it in the PG-13 rating, so we don't have to keep reading smut, because this story has 3 mentions of it. One's a whole chapter, and the other 2 are little blurbs of it. Not that I'm complaining, but I love the story, but reading it kind of makes me uncomfortable, even though the whole chapter was smut and I read it. I survived, though, but I don't really want to have to do that again until I'm ready. So, give me an idea of a story you want to hear. I recommend something that is well-known. If it's not well-known, maybe we can up its popularity by doing this. But if it is well-known, this will definitely bring a boost to the popularity, because a whole bunch of people will listen to it, which I hope will happen, because I've been getting a lot of really positive comments on the videos I've already made. Thank you to all my lovely viewers. So I'm going to leave now, because I've talked too much. I've rambled. And here is chapter 10, the smut chapter of the amazing story Syrup and Honey. This is probably the longest introduction I've ever done. Yeah. Okay, so enjoy my voice reading smut. Bye, guys. The following story is rated M for mature audiences only. If you've already read the fan fiction, please feel free to continue if you are alright listening to the smut. If not, below is the time in which the smut is put, so please feel free to skip it if you wish. Thank you. Syrup and Honey, Chapter 10. They slowly dropped down onto the bed together, side by side. They couldn't tear their eyes away from each other, fascinated with the love and the want in the other's gaze. Kurt scooted until he was pressed against Blaine and ran a finger from his forehead down the bridge of his nose, stopping at his lips. Blaine kissed his finger softly, and Kurt immediately replaced it with his mouth. They sighed in contentment against their parted lips. "You're so beautiful," Kurt whispered, taking in Blaine's eyes that resembled liquid honey, his kiss-swollen mouth, his silky, unruly curls, the strong outline of his jaw. He kissed him again, before Blaine had time to even think of a response. They stayed like that, tangled up in each other, trying to get even closer, hands slowly roaming down backs and sides and arms. Their breathing started getting heavier, but kissing seemed so much more important. Kurt pressed a little deeper, his tongue teasing the roof of Blaine's mouth, when a clap of thunder broke the wonderful quietness of the apartment. Startled, Blaine jumped back, as if the sound had suddenly awakened him from a dream. They could hear the rain starting to fall outside, rhythmically tapping against the windows. Blaine's eyes were wide as he let them wander all over Kurt's flushed face, his full lips, his mussed hair. He swallowed as his thoughts tried to find order inside his head. Right now, they were screaming at him. "Kurt's in your bed! Kurt's in your bed! Kurt's in your bed!" Kurt moved forward and kissed his chin sweetly. "Are you okay? You look like you're about to freak out." "I'm fine," Blaine mumbled. Kurt started rubbing up and down his back in a comforting way. "We don't have to do anything. You know that, right?" he asked, and Blaine could see the glimpse in his eyes that told him he could trust Kurt completely. Blaine nodded. "I really want to, though," he admitted before he could stop himself. "It's just... I'm nervous. I haven't... in a while, and Kurt nuzzled their faces together, brushing his lips against Blaine's. "Shh, don't be. It'll be okay." Blaine turned his head into the pillow in embarrassment. "I sound like a teenager." He peeked at Kurt with one eye, his expression scrunching a bit. "I don't want to screw this up." "And you won't." With a kiss to the tip of his nose, Kurt pulled away slightly. "We can go watch a movie if you want. There's no need to do this now." "No," Blaine whined. He actually whined. His arms tightened around Kurt's waist, pulling him closer, and that caused his hip to accidentally touch Kurt's thigh. His erection pressed against him, and before he had time to even blush and apologize, he moaned, low in the back of his throat. "Blaine." Kurt licked his lips, his eyes blowing up in sheer desire once again. He let out a small growl as he pushed his leg farther into Blaine's groin. Blaine moaned again and shivered. Another clap of thunder resonated outside. Kurt could feel Blaine against him, could feel how much Blaine wanted him, just as much as he wanted Blaine. With a hand on his shoulder, Kurt forced Blaine onto his back, shifting a bit so he was half on top of him. He kissed him open-mouthed with an edge of desperation before letting himself move down. Kurt kissed his jaw, and then spent a couple of minutes on his neck, noticing how Blaine grew more and more eager, writhing under him. And then, just when Blaine's fingers dug into his back almost painfully, he pulled away and got up, taking a couple steps away from the bed. Blaine's hazel eyes were so full of confusion that if Kurt hadn't been so aroused, he probably would have laughed. Instead, he took a deep breath and kept his gaze on the man still on the bed. "If I make you feel uncomfortable," he started saying. "You don't, Kurt," Blaine interrupted, sitting up and leaning on his elbows. "Please, come back here." "In a minute," Kurt swallowed. His skin was burning and the need to be touched was almost overwhelming. "I want you to tell me if there's something you don't want or you don't like, or..." "I promise I will," Blaine assured him. "I will, but please, please, Kurt." Kurt reached to run his hand through Blaine's curls. He was so sensitive at this point that just feeling Kurt's fingers on his hair made him whimper. He tried to grab Kurt by the wrist to tug him back into bed, but Kurt removed his hand before he could react. Blaine was about to let out another whine in protest when he saw Kurt had moved his hands to the hem of his sweater. After just 1 second of hesitation, or maybe of mere preparation, Kurt took it off. He let it fall onto the floor, for once not caring about his clothes. Blaine stared. Kurt was still wearing an undershirt, but there was so much more skin now than he had seen before. It was pale, creamy and firm, and his fingers tingled with the need to touch and feel just how soft it probably was. Blaine's mouth watered at the sight of Kurt's arms, so strong and defined. He wanted them around him, holding him. Kurt blushed a bit under Blaine's scrutiny, but kept going. He tugged on the shirt and took it off as well, revealing his broad chest, the taut skin on his stomach, the trail of light hair going down into the waistband of his jeans. Blaine had to bite his lip to hold back a moan, aching to pinch and lick Kurt's perfect pink nipples, already turned into hardened nubs in anticipation. He was so focused on imagining how they would feel in his mouth that he didn't notice Kurt had popped open the button of his jeans until he heard the metallic sound of the zipper being pulled down. Kurt had to shimmy his hips to get out of his skinny jeans, and Blaine watched with eager eyes. Once Kurt was in nothing but his underwear, he made his way back to the bed. Blaine's eyes moved over his body, trying to take in everything, but not knowing where to focus. He was so beautiful, so touchable, so irresistible. Kurt knelt beside him on the mattress and looked down at him. Blaine couldn't really wait anymore, so he hesitantly reached and traced his fingers down Kurt's body, starting at the sharpness of his collarbone, down the middle of his chest, and stopping right in his belly button. Kurt shivered with the caress. "Gosh, Kurt, you're incredible," Blaine whispered, fascinated. He touched the light brown hair that covered Kurt's legs, loving how soft and manly it was at the same time. He tried not to stare at the bulge hidden by the thin layer of fabric, although it made him ache and want and need. "I feel a little lonely here," Kurt said with a playful grin. "Can I take off your hoodie?" "Yes," Blaine answered, already scrambling up to get rid of it. Kurt chuckled and helped him, tugging at the hem. He wasn't wearing a shirt under the hoodie, and the air evaporated from Kurt's lungs when he discovered the tanned, perfect skin dusted with dark hair below. Blaine was almost sculptural, and he couldn't believe that had been hiding under those boring suits Blaine wore to work every day. The stunning V shape of his hip bones made Kurt hunger in a way he hadn't ever felt before, and he found himself wanting to bite and suck right there. He traced the bones with the tip of his index finger, feeling Blaine's stomach contracting at the touch. Blaine's hazel eyes were fixed on him, following his every move. Even the slightest brush of Kurt's fingertips made him burn. And then Kurt started sliding his finger along the waistband of his sweatpants, barely slipping under, teasingly, and Blaine was surprised he didn't burst into flames. "Kurt," he muttered, gulping. He fisted the bed's cover in one of his hands. "It's okay, baby, I was getting there." Kurt leaned down and pressed a soft but too chaste kiss on Blaine's cheekbone. He rested their foreheads together for a second. "Raise your hips a bit for me." Blaine obliged immediately, and Kurt carefully tugged on his pants to take them off, moving down the bed along with them and finally sitting between Blaine's feet. He dropped the pants to the floor before taking his socks off and doing the same. Then he allowed himself to look at the man lying in front of him. His cock twitched a bit at the sight. Shit, Blaine was so beautiful. Kurt couldn't believe he had him there all for himself. His legs, though a bit shorter than his, looked so strong, so toned. He was hairier than Kurt, and even though Kurt had always preferred the contrary, he couldn't help but think Blaine was absolutely perfect. There was so much to touch that he didn't know where to start. His eyes fell on the bulge covered by dark green cotton. There was already a wet spot in the fabric, and Kurt had to use all of his self-control not to start mouthing at him in that exact place. He wanted to take this as slowly as he could. He was incapable of biting back the most animalistic growl that seeing Blaine like this elicited in him. "Damn it, Blaine. You look amazing." Blaine's only response was a wanton whine. "I know, baby, I know." Kurt took a few seconds to drop tiny kisses all over Blaine's face. "Just tell me what you want." I don't know," he mumbled, breathless. "Anything, everything. Kurt, please." Okay. Kurt nodded. He wanted to do this right. He wanted to make Blaine happy and give him what he hadn't had in years, what Blaine hadn't allowed himself to experience. He was terrified to make a mistake, but he knew that letting his instincts take over was the best thing to do. So Kurt decided to focus on Blaine's neck first. He kissed it lightly before choosing a spot right under his jaw to suck on. It was a bit scratchy because of the stubble, but it felt wonderful on his tongue. Blaine squirmed and writhed under him, his fingers pressing against his back a little tighter with every jolt of pleasure. Once that spot was red and slick, Kurt moved on, lapping gently at his throat until he reached his collarbone, where he latched firmly, sucking again. Kurt's pink, full lips barely brushed Blaine's chest, so softly that it made him think he had imagined it. But then his tongue was rolling in circles around one of his nipples, and Blaine couldn't stop himself from rocking his hips up in an instinctive search for some friction that was denied to him, as Kurt's hips were not even close to his. He teased the little nub for a couple of minutes and then sucked on it. Blaine moaned loudly, one of his hands moving to Kurt's head involuntarily and fisting his chestnut hair. "So good," he stammered, amazed. "Kurt, that's so good." Kurt wondered for a fraction of a second if Blaine had even imagined he could feel this much pleasure just from something like that, but immediately cleared his head of any unnecessary thoughts to focus back on making him feel even more pleasure. He shifted a bit and moved his mouth to the other nipple to give it the same attention. When he was done, he allowed himself a second to breathe and look up to Blaine, who had his head thrown back and kept swallowing over and over. Blaine was slowly losing control, and Kurt wanted to push him a little bit more over the edge. He blew carefully, letting the cold air hit Blaine's spit-slick nipples. Blaine shivered and moaned once more, his fingers tightening in Kurt's hair. With a smile, Kurt kept kissing down over Blaine's stomach, running his tongue in the dips between each rib, circling his belly button, loving how the hair that trailed even farther south felt against his soft lips. When he reached the waistband of his underwear, Kurt hesitated, but decided against taking them off, wanting to drag it out a bit longer. Instead, he did just what he had wanted to do before. He softly lowered his face against Blaine's erection and started mouthing at it, starting at the base and moving to the tip gradually. Blaine's whine of pure pleasure sounded so broken that Kurt glanced up at him without stopping to make sure he was all right. Blaine was looking back at him with the wildest hazel eyes he had ever seen, and his face was a painting of nothing but utter beauty and desperation. His parted lips were so red that it was obvious he had been biting on them. Kurt couldn't stop the moan of sheer want that escaped from his throat. It went straight to Blaine's cock, where his mouth was working over the cotton-covered head. That seemed to be too much for Blaine. His erection started pulsing under Kurt's lips, and he moaned louder than ever as he came in his underwear. Kurt kept kissing him through it, feeling the warm spurts of cum wetting the fabric as he dug his fingers into Blaine's thighs to hold himself together a little bit longer. "Oh my God, Kurt," he panted, still shaking in the afterglow of his orgasm. He tugged on Kurt's hair until he understood and moved back up to lay next to him. "Oh my God." "Was that okay?" Kurt asked, wrapping an arm around him. "Okay?" Blaine repeated, incredulous. "I came way too soon. It was more than okay." Kurt decided he really liked post-orgasm Blaine. He seemed a lot more carefree. "I hope you don't think I'm done with you yet." Blaine chuckled and nuzzled against his neck. "I think it's your turn now." Kurt shook his head, grinning. "Nope. It's our turn." He leaned in to kiss him, full and passionate, before Blaine could think of anything to say. When he pulled away, his blue eyes were so bright, Blaine was afraid he would be blinded by them. I want to touch you, Blaine. I want to touch you too." Kurt nibbled on Blaine's jaw. "But I'm all gross and sticky." "I don't care," Kurt said eagerly. "Please?" Blaine couldn't say no when Kurt begged him like that. Yes, of course." Blaine took his underwear off and dropped it on the floor after cleaning a bit of his mess. He was half hard again already, and Kurt looked at him, feeling he could come just from that. He really couldn't understand how it was possible for someone to be as breathtaking as Blaine was. Blaine hooked a finger under the elastic of Kurt's boxers. "Can I?" "Yeah," Kurt nodded, shifting to help Blaine. Blaine moaned when Kurt was completely naked. "Gosh, Kurt, look at you." "I can't. I'm too busy looking at you," Kurt replied, and touched the firm muscles of Blaine's abs. Blaine attacked the crook of Kurt's neck with his lips, kissing eagerly and lapping at the pale skin there. Kurt arced against him, exhaling shakily and gripping onto Blaine's shoulders tightly. Their now free directions accidentally met, and they both threw their heads back, growling in appreciation of the tantalizing sensation that rushed through their bodies. Kurt immediately wrapped his legs around Blaine's waist and pulled him closer, intensifying the pleasure and making them whimper louder. They started rocking together, Blaine never stopping the movements of his mouth over every inch of Kurt's skin he could reach. Kurt thrust sharply one more time, but he knew he would come soon if he didn't stop, even if it felt wonderful like this. But he wanted something else. Blaine, wait. He tangled his fingers in the other man's dark curls. What is it? Blaine gave him a confused, worried look tainted with arousal. I don't want to come like this, Kurt whined, because his cock was still trapped between their bodies, and it was so hard not to keep going. Blaine's eyes softened. He brushed Kurt's hair back. What do you want, beautiful? Kurt's heart was beating strongly inside his chest. Can I... in you? Inside of you? Blaine's growl echoed in the otherwise silent room. He dropped his head onto Kurt's shoulder. Shit, Kurt, yes, please, yes, I want you. Kurt swallowed and took a deep breath. Are you sure? Blaine's teeth grazed the outline of his jaw. I've never been sure of anything in my life. I love you so much. I love you too. Kurt smiled and leaned to kiss Blaine again. They took their time to get their tongues dancing together, letting the anticipation and desire grow even more. Blaine started getting impatient. He wanted more. He needed to feel Kurt everywhere. He wanted to kiss his skin and familiarize himself with every inch of his body. He broke the kiss to brush his lips down Kurt's chest and suck on his nipples for a little while, making Kurt gasp and cry out for more. He was about to continue his path down when Kurt pushed him back up, panting and desperate. I can't wait any more, please, Blaine. Blaine nodded jerkily and pulled away just enough to reach his bedside table, where he started searching through the drawers as Kurt kept nibbling at his shoulder. He finally managed to find the bottle of lube, but he knew it was in vain to look for condoms. He didn't have any because he hadn't needed them in years. He gulped, realizing his mistake. Fuck, he muttered, and if he hadn't felt so good in Kurt's arms, he would have stood up to bang his head against the wall in frustration. What is it? Kurt asked, still busy kissing his shoulder. I don't have any condoms, Blaine admitted. Kurt stopped and stared at him with eyes blurred with want. I'm sorry, Kurt. I've never really needed them until tonight. Kurt had to blink several times to actually understand what Blaine was saying, because all he could think of was how good it felt to have the other man pressed against him that way. But he finally snapped out of it. I think there's one in my wallet. Oh, thank God. Blaine stood, causing him to instantly miss the heat of Kurt's body. Where is it? Living room, I think, with my keys and my cell phone, Kurt answered, and he should have given himself a high five for actually remembering that at this point. Kurt waited for Blaine to return with his eyes closed, willing himself to cool down a bit. He stroked his erection a couple of times to release some of the tension as he heard Blaine moving around the living room, muttering, "Where the hell is it?" over and over until he sounded victorious, and Kurt assumed he had found what he was looking for. When Blaine stepped back into the room, the sight that greeted him threatened to push him over the edge of another orgasm. Kurt was spread out, pale and gorgeous, in his bed, touching himself very slowly, with his eyes closed, his hair messier than he had ever seen it before. Blaine swallowed and rushed back to the bed, opening the condom wrapper as he went. Kurt opened one lazy eye when he felt the mattress shifting under Blaine's weight, and moaned when he noticed the glimpse of wild desperation in those beautiful hazel eyes. Blaine kneeled in between his legs and carefully slid the condom on his length. Kurt couldn't help but buck up to the touch, loving how Blaine's fingers felt on him. "Kurt," Blaine said in a pleading voice. "Oh, okay." Kurt nodded and brought Blaine down for one more kiss. He allowed himself to get lost in it as he did his best to regain his composure. Finally, he whispered against his lips, "Get on your stomach, baby." Blaine hurried to oblige, flopping down on the bed and hiding his face in the pillow. Kurt let his gaze wander down the strong outlines of his back and the sweet, tempting curve of his ass. He leaned down to trail his lips down his spine and push his tongue into the dimples above his butt. Blaine was fisting the covers so hard his knuckles were white, and he bit on the pillow to stop himself from begging, knowing he would only embarrass himself with how needy he would sound. Kurt's mouth felt amazing on his skin. It was setting fire to every inch he kissed, and Blaine was trembling with pleasure under him. Blaine couldn't help but thrust against the mattress when Kurt spread his cheeks apart and a lube-coated finger circled his entrance lightly. He gasped and closed his eyes. When Kurt's finger pushed inside, he moaned loudly, unable to contain the sounds that were coming up his throat. Kurt waited, gave him time, kissed the back of his shoulders soothingly, and repeated that he loved him before continuing. As soon as Blaine started asking for more, Kurt complied and pushed his finger all the way in. The burn was so good, so intense. Blaine emptied his head of any thoughts that didn't have to do with Kurt in the way he was touching him so intimately, in a way that not even Blaine allowed himself to. Kurt gently stretched him, adding more fingers when Blaine told him he was ready, listening to Blaine's strangled sounds, biting his lips to contain the moans that wanted to escape from him when Blaine started thrusting his ass back towards him, trying to get even more from the 3 fingers Kurt had buried in him. Kurt was sweating. He had been hard for so long already that he didn't know how he could possibly wait any longer. He scissored his fingers one last time before leaning down to talk right into Blaine's ear. "Are you ready?" "Yes." Blaine actually whined. He was completely wrecked, damp curls sticking to his forehead, sweat covering his skin, eyes blown. "Yes, Kurt, yes. I'm ready. I need you." Blaine sighed in longing as he clenched around the emptiness left behind when Kurt withdrew his fingers. Kurt poured lube onto his hands to get himself ready, and when he looked up to shift closer, he almost fainted at the view in front of him. Blaine was lying on the bed on his stomach, his legs parted as far as he could take them, his ass barely raised in the air, waiting. His whole body was trembling in sheer want, and Kurt moaned softly when he realized he had done this to Blaine. Blaine took a few deep breaths, trying to calm down. He was so desperate, he was afraid he would come as soon as Kurt as much as pushed inside of him. And though he knew he would feel amazing, he didn't want to disappoint Kurt. He wanted to make him feel as good as he was feeling. Kurt lined up with his entrance and then moved forward. The stretch was blunt and sudden, and Blaine moaned brokenly. Kurt kept going until he was half inside of him and then waited, holding on to Blaine's hips so tight he knew he'd leave bruises. He only dared to move again when Blaine relaxed under him and nodded his head against the pillow he was clutching to his chest. Kurt pushed the rest of the way in and then stopped again, shifting to find a good angle as he allowed Blaine some more time. He ended up lying on top of Blaine, his chest pressed in the other man's back, covering him completely. He kissed the base of his neck, tasting the saltiness of his sweat on his tongue. "I love you, Blaine," he whispered, and Blaine shivered. "I love you too," he half mumbled, half moaned. Kurt started thrusting lightly. "God, you're so tight and perfect." "I don't know how long I can last," Blaine admitted as he tried to spread his legs farther. "You feel too good. I don't think I can really last either." Kurt started sucking a purpling mark on Blaine's shoulder, not even able to remember when he had made it. It took them a couple of minutes to find a rhythm that worked for both of them. Kurt shifted the angle of his hips twice before Blaine screamed so loud he was sure the entire building had heard him. "There, Kurt! Oh, right there, God!" Kurt would have smiled against the skin of his neck if he wasn't so wrecked himself. Their hands found each other, and Kurt pulled them above their heads, intertwining their fingers. He could feel himself brushing against Blaine's prostate with every thrust, and he knew if he kept going like that, Blaine would come soon. The rutting Blaine was doing against the bed didn't help to slow things down. The sounds they were eliciting from each other were delicious and loud. Blaine loved how high-pitched Kurt's voice became when he was close, loved the weight of his body on top of him, the sway of one another as they chased their orgasms. The pleasure building low in his stomach wasn't unexpected. Blaine clenched around Kurt, making him groan and bite down on his shoulder hard. "Kurt, oh God, I'm gonna..." Kurt's breath hit hot and damp against Blaine's neck as he whined and moved his hips even faster, his movements becoming sloppy and desperate, his orgasm striking him without much warning. He started coming inside of Blaine, throbbing, pulsing, and that was enough for Blaine to finally let go. They shook against each other, their fingers tightening their grip, their bodies moving together to try to make the overwhelming sensations last as long as possible. In a second of consciousness, Blaine wished he wasn't on his stomach so he could kiss Kurt, feel his mouth on his. But then everything was pleasure, 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 hot, 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 and so good. Finally, everything went still. Kurt had collapsed on top of him, breathless, boneless, exhausted. He barely managed to turn his head enough to drop a kiss to Blaine's shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse, unrecognizable. Blaine nodded. "I'm so tired, though." Kurt smiled lazily and shifted to get more comfortable, only to be reminded that his cock was still buried inside of Blaine. They both whimpered as Kurt pulled away carefully, moving to lie down next to Blaine instead. He rubbed slow, soothing circles on the small of his back. Blaine sighed in contentment and nuzzled against him, smiling. His eyes were closed, and Kurt knew he was just seconds away from falling asleep. "Blaine?" "Mm-hmm." "You do know that we have to clean up and change the covers, right?" he asked with a playful grin on his face, happiness expanding inside of his chest like a balloon. The way Blaine pouted was so adorable that he couldn't help but laugh at him and lean down to kiss him one more time. Kurt woke up with a smile. His naked body was wrapped in soft, clean sheets, and the first thing he noticed before he even opened his eyes was the intoxicating scent of Blaine all around him. He hummed contentedly and extended an arm in Blaine's direction, wanting to pull him closer. Only his arm never found anything. The other side of the bed was still warm, but vacant. Kurt peeked with one eye, his face still pressed against the pillow. The room was bathed in clear, pale sunlight, so it couldn't be late, which Kurt felt grateful for since he still had to go to work. Their clothes were still scattered over the floor, but Blaine was nowhere to be seen. He propped himself up on his elbows, knowing it was too late to go back to sleep, even though he really, really wanted to, and started looking around for a clock or a cell phone where he could check the time. When his gaze fell on the bedside table of the side Blaine had slept on, he felt his heart flutter in his chest. With the events of the night before, he hadn't paid much attention to his surroundings, but now he noticed the picture Blaine had framed and placed there. It was the one he had taken of Kurt and him when they were walking Robert around Lima during the Thanksgiving weekend. He reached to take a better look at it. It was a beautiful picture. He could see the love and joy in Blaine's eyes, and the smile on his own face was so bright and happy, too. He brushed his thumb over Blaine's face. He looked so gorgeous. He definitely needed to ask Blaine for a copy of that picture. Before he had time to wonder once again where Blaine was, he got his answer. He noticed the sound of the shower only when it mixed with the sound of a wonderful singing voice.
Your mentality, step up to reality. But each time I do, just the thought of you makes me stop before I begin. 'Cause I've got you, you're under my skin.
Kurt had been holding his breath during the entire song without even realizing it. After that, Blaine's voice stopped forming the words to hum the melody instead, and Kurt took a shaky breath in and squealed as he rolled around in the bed. How could Blaine be so perfect? How could Blaine actually be his? After what had happened the night before, there was no way to deny it. They belonged to each other, and Kurt wouldn't have had it any other way. He noticed the sound of the shower had stopped. Deciding he wanted to make breakfast for Blaine, he shot up and off the bed, reaching for his boxers and putting them on. He hesitated for just 1 second, and then picked up Blaine's hoodie too, instead of his own clothes. He walked barefoot to the kitchen. Robert was sleeping soundly on the couch, but woke up when he noticed Kurt was up and followed him. Kurt scratched his ears. "Good morning, sweet boy. I'm going to make some breakfast for Blaine. Would you like something too?" Robert only wagged his tail faster and sat next to Kurt as he went through the cupboards in the fridge, trying to decide what to make. He started the coffee maker and then grabbed eggs, bread, milk, and the other ingredients he needed to make French toast. Kurt had just put the slices of bread into the pan when he felt 2 arms wrapping around his waist. He smiled as Blaine dropped a kiss to the curve of his neck. "Good morning," he whispered right next to his ear, and Kurt almost dropped the plastic spatula on the burner as a shiver traveled down his spine. "Morning." Kurt inhaled deeply. Blaine smelled like soap, shampoo, aftershaving, and himself, and it was a killing combination. "You smell wonderful. And you look wonderful." Blaine's hands roamed down his sides and settled on the hem of the hoodie. "I hope you don't mind I borrowed it," Kurt said playfully. "It was cold when I got out of bed." "You should keep it," Blaine answered, nosing at the base of Kurt's neck. "It looks better on you anyway." Kurt put the toast on a plate before turning around. Blaine had another pair of sweatpants on and a Harvard t-shirt that had probably been washed too many times. His curls fell free and damp on his forehead, and he had just shaved. He looked soft and kissable, and Kurt didn't think that was fair when it was still so early. Blaine leaned in for a kiss, but Kurt put 2 fingers on his mouth. "Morning breath," he muttered simply. "I don't care." Blaine mouthed at his fingers until Kurt's entire hand felt weak and he finally dropped it. Then he moved forward and pressed his lips to Kurt's. Blaine tasted minty, and Kurt whimpered a bit into his mouth. When they pulled away, Kurt was fisting Blaine's shirt and trying to drag him closer. "Last night was amazing," Blaine said against his lips, low and a bit hoarse just from the memories. "I know I'm pretty much passed out after, but I wanted to tell you that." "It really was," Kurt agreed with a smile, and then he kissed Blaine, just a quick peck once again. "Thank you." Blaine caressed his back under the hoodie, and Kurt wondered when he had sneaked his hands down there, because he really hadn't even noticed. "No need to thank me. I had a great time too, you know." Kurt's blue eyes were bright with playfulness. "I'm not just thanking you for the sex, though," Blaine admitted, nuzzling against his cheek. "For dinner, for my birthday, for coming into my life, for loving me." "You deserve everything, Blaine," Kurt said more seriously, cupping Blaine's face in his hands to make sure Blaine looked at him when he said that and that he believed it. After one more peck, he grinned. "And you also deserve a breakfast that isn't cold, so we definitely should eat." "I'm starving, so that sounds like an awesome idea," Blaine replied and moved away, causing Kurt to instantly miss the comfort his body brought him when it was pressed against his. Kurt took everything to the table while Blaine put dog food in Robert's bowl. Then they sat together, sipping at their coffees. Blaine poured a bit too much syrup on his French toast, making Kurt frown. The frown, though, disappeared when Blaine gave him a sloppy, sticky kiss that made him laugh. Kurt finally glanced at the clock placed on the opposite wall and hurried the coffee he still had in his cup. "Damn, I have to be at the bakery in 40 minutes!" Blaine pouted. Kurt thought that if it was going to become a habit, he would have a whole lot of trouble getting stuff done, because he just had to kiss him when he did that. "I was hoping you would like to spend the day with me," Kurt continued. "I know maybe being there at the shop all day isn't the ideal way to spend your Saturday, but—" "I'd love to," Blaine interrupted, the pout being instantly replaced by a smile. "Good." Kurt smiled too. "And I was thinking maybe you could bring Robert too so we can stay at my place for the rest of the weekend." "Perfect." Blaine's smile was so big, Kurt was seriously concerned his face would split in two. Kurt shifted closer to kiss him before standing up. Can I use your shower? Of course you can. Blaine nodded and stood up too. I'll take care of the dishes while you get ready. Kurt took a step to go to the bathroom, but Blaine stopped him before he could go too far, grabbing his wrists and gently tugging him closer. I love you, he whispered against his lips. Kurt's eyes were so full of love he could barely look at him without tearing up. I love you too. They kissed. Again. Because they could. Because it was something they did now. You still taste like syrup, Kurt giggled pleasantly. Blaine moved in to kiss him again. He felt like he couldn't get enough. And judging by the breathless, eager sounds Kurt was making, he couldn't either. You're gonna be late, honey, Blaine muttered. Kurt whined but pulled away, finally making his way out of the kitchen. Blaine stood where he was for a couple of minutes, still feeling the tingle of Kurt's lips against his heart beating so loud he was sure Kurt would be able to hear it from the bathroom. He stood there, feeling the strangest sensation run through his veins, fill his senses, and warm his skin. For the first time in what seemed like a lifetime, Blaine Anderson was utterly and unmistakably happy. End of chapter 10.